being in this lower position here because of my foot, but it's easier than hopping while I'm talking. I wanted to say that last year I had the privilege in the summertime of hearing Dr. Hatcher in Llewellyn speak about moral development, and the subject of these 2 days is moral and social development. And he was part of an institute in St. Petersburg that was working on this whole issue. And a number of very talented people were working with him on it, and he had shared some of that information at the course that I was at. I was really, really excited by a lot of the concepts, and I actually, over the past year, tried to put several of them to test. And really trying to think deeply and apply them to situations. And they certainly bore out to be true, and I was excited by the results of that. And the Mary and Jack Bahá'í Institute invited Bill to come here and take part in a week-long school, which we're now having at this time. And I would say that there's the subject. I think what is fascinating is that the subject that we're going to deal with is one that is of course affecting the whole world. And many of you heard that the United Nations had done this study that tried to determine why so much was spent on aid and so little had been accomplished. And the committee at the end of their investigation had concluded that what was really missing was there was a lack of moral leadership. So the whole issue of moral leadership and social development has become a really fundamental issue, and there are people working on it really all over the planet, and I think the Baha'is are really trying to contribute to that whole area, and I know that that's been a focus for Dr. Hatcher's work up to now. For those of you who don't know Dr. Hatcher, he was at Laval University as a mathematics professor in Quebec City, and he retired from that and has been pioneering in Russia now for a number of years, and is serving on the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Russia, which we have a really wonderful little picture of here for those of you who would like to see it. And he's also an invited professor working with the Steklov Institute of Mathematics, and especially it's in the research area. So that's where his work is taking him now, and he's still developing and working very hard on this whole issue of moral and social development. So I'm really excited that he could be here, and I think that we'll find this a very stimulating occasion. So please welcome Bill Hatcher.
Oh, wait.
Hope you're not going to be blinded by all this.
No. Well, I appreciate Gordon's introduction. I appreciate the invitation. I'm just as happy to find anybody who's willing to listen to me as I am to be listened to. I hope that we can address some substantial issues and not remain on the surface. And I would like to start by putting what I see is the following fundamental paradox of Baha'i experience, which is the following fact. We know from the writings of the faith that the Baha'i faith is the most powerful force that has ever come into human affairs. I can elaborate on that in a few minutes if we want. I'm presuming that you've all read these passages from the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, where Shoghi Effendi tells us, for example, that the Baha'i revelation is the greatest revelation, single revelation that will ever come to this planet. It is greater than all past revelations because it is the transition from childhood to adulthood in the life of humanity. And it is likewise, as he says, greater than all, nor will future ages see its equivalent. Because once you've achieved the transition to maturity, then you don't need as much energy to maintain. In other words, it's the transition from one phase of a system to another phase of the system that takes the energy. Once you've reached a kind of a plateau, another level, then it takes less energy to maintain this level. Just as it took less energy to maintain the lower levels before the transition. And if we compare, well, let's just take the statement that if knowledge is 24 letters, that all of the revelations from Adam to through Muhammad revealed 2 of these letters, and the Bab revealed the other 22 letters. And the Bab in the Bayan says that the revelation of Baha'u'llah, that is him whom God shall make manifest, is infinitely greater than his revelation. And his revelation represents 22 24ths, okay, 11 12ths of the sum of all human knowledge. And Baha'u'llah's revelation is infinitely greater than that. Or look at the time span involved. Jesus' ministry lasted for 3 years. We have only fragmentary accounts of 18 days of his life. The Quran of Muhammad, which, as Shoghi Effendi says, is the only surely authenticated holy book. He doesn't say that the Bible is not authenticated. He said it is not surely authenticated, which is just simply reflecting the known scholarship on the issue. Whereas the Quran is surely authenticated. We know that it's authentic. Other parts of the Bible may or may not be authentic. We don't know because there have been so much interpolation, copying, and so on. All of the problems with ancient manuscripts. Well, the Quran of Muhammad, as we know, is a very dense, a very powerful, a very complex book, but and Muhammad's ministry lasted 40 years, and the Quran was revealed over the period of this 40-year ministry. But if we look at the volume of the Quran, it is not even as big as, say, the Bayani Farsi of the Bab, and that's only one of the Bab's books. But to give some idea of the quantity of revelation, there is currently over 2,000 pages of writings of Baha'u'llah published in English. And there exist in the archives in Haifa 40,000 manuscript pages of the writings of Baha'u'llah that have yet to be published in any language. 40,000 manuscript pages. So it is literally, as Baha'u'llah characterized it, an ocean of revelation, a continual outpouring. If we look at the length of the ministry, we can say that the revelation began with the declaration of the Bab in 1844 and was closed with the death of Abdul Baha in 1921. So again, we have a ministry that endured about 80 years. A combined ministry of the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdul Baha. So these are a few of the indications of the relative power of the Baha'i revelation. It is literally, not in any metaphoric or symbolic sense, it is literally the most powerful thing that has ever existed on this planet. Now, I spoke in the beginning of a paradox, and the paradox is this: how could such a powerful thing exist and go unnoticed by the majority of mankind? How could such a powerful thing exist and even most of us Baha'is do not feel this power or recognize this power. How is such a thing possible? How is it possible that this thing is so powerful and yet so few Baha'is have been able to transform their lives significantly? All of the problems we know we have in the Baha'i community, I won't give you the litany of the things, the different problems we discuss about the divorce rate in the Baha'i community and everything. The fact is that Baha'is clearly suffer all of the ills, I mean, in various degrees, all of the ills that afflict the whole of mankind afflict also the Baha'is. Not necessarily to the same degree or whatever, but in other words, we can't claim or we do not observe that the Baha'i community is anyway sort of magically protected from all of these mental, social, psychological, physical ills, moral ills that afflict the majority of mankind. We have no special status on this score. So how is it then that such a powerful thing can exist and be completely ignored by the vast majority of mankind and be so little understood or so little used by even the Baha'is, even those who have recognized that this power exists? So this is what I call the central paradox of Baha'i experience. And I think that if we do not reflect on this paradox, if we do not find the answer to it, then our faith is going to be extremely weak. Because at some point we're going to say, well, it's all a dream. In other words, at some point we will say, well, you know, maybe it isn't all this powerful thing. I mean, maybe it's just a bunch of writings by this guy in the Middle East 100 years ago, and fine, okay, there's 40,000 manuscript pages and everything, but, you know, where is all this power? He talks about the power, but where is it, you know? So, in other words, unless we understand very deeply what is going on here, it's quite possible that our faith can be severely challenged, because we can lose faith, if you will, lose confidence in the existence of this power. In other words, one can simply come to the apparently logical conclusion, if this power is so little apparent, then maybe it doesn't exist. In other words, maybe it's just an imagined thing. Maybe it doesn't really exist objectively, this power, or whatever. Well, of course, the logical answer to the paradox is the fact that, yes, this power does exist, it is the most powerful thing, but the deployment of this power, the actualization of this power, has been made conditional by God on certain actions, certain attitudes, for our own good. In fact, because it is so powerful, because it is in fact so incredibly powerful, this unimaginable power, that if we had easy access to this power, we would misuse it. Even the best of us would misuse it, as some of the best of us have misused it. I'm speaking, of course, of covenant breakers, for example. As you know, if you've read Tahirzade's book on the covenant, that some of the leading Baha'is from the very beginning, the close associates of Baha'u'llah, I'm not speaking just about the family of Baha'u'llah, but some of the really lions in the faith. The man, I've forgotten his name, who was chained to Baha'u'llah in the Sea of Chal. became a covenant. Well, Mirza Akajan, his amanuensis for 40 years, became a covenant breaker, and so on and so on. We see that the possibility of the misuse of this power is not a hypothetical possibility. It is something which has occurred, and which is occurring, and which undoubtedly will occur in the future. So that's one part of the answer. That's one part of the answer, namely that if we had easy access, if we had casual access to this power, if we could just turn it on and off like you turn on and off a faucet, then we would, in the first place, not respect, we would not realize how great the power is. In other words, it would become a common thing, just like we know when we think about it that, well, yes, radio and TV are very impressive things, but I mean, they become very everyday when you can just turn a knob and get a perfect picture of something that's half a world away and all of this, you know, from all different angles, you know, then pretty soon you stop to think, well, isn't this really incredible that I can sit here in my living room and, you know, get a perfect, absolutely perfect picture of something that's going on halfway around the world. I mean, it's incredible. And that such a thing didn't even exist 100 years ago, and in fact didn't exist during all the 6,000 years of the Adamic cycle. And then all of a sudden, and the principles on which a television worked have always existed, so nothing has changed. It's simply that we have recently discovered how to relate to these laws in a certain way that allows us to use them. So this powerful thing, which is the transmission of physical images over unlimited distances. I mean, after all, we get them from space, we get them from the moon, from Mars, and everything else, right? So this powerful thing, which is the instantaneous transmission of physical images over vast distances, that's a very powerful thing, right? An extraordinarily powerful thing. It has always existed. That power has always been there. You know, so if you wanted to use a historical argument, you can say, well, look, for 6,000 years we didn't have this thing, so we're certainly not going to have it tomorrow, right? But in fact, there was a day when you did have it tomorrow. I mean, literally, historically speaking, it was from one day to the next that this technology became known and exploited. And yet, nothing in reality changed. Nothing in objective reality changed. The principles upon which a television works, or an internal combustion engine works, or whatever, always existed, as Abdu'l-Baha says. Man brings them from the invisible world to the visible world. But they always existed objectively in the invisible world. So it's the same thing with the faith. The faith exists as an entity. It has objective existence. This power exists objectively. It is not a subjective thing. It's not an imagined thing. Its existence is in no wise contingent on our knowledge of its existence. I mean, even if not one single person on earth ever recognized Baha'u'llah, the faith would still be just as powerful as it is, okay? This power is an objective thing. It is not subjective. It is not subjective. This is something we can discuss philosophically later on if you're interested in. Some Baha'is have seized on the subjectivism that is currently raging in circles of thought as kind of an opening to the Baha'i faith, but this, in my view, is an entirely wrong direction. And I'm a thoroughgoing Platonist, and as a matter of fact, Abdu'l-Baha, as we can discover if we read the Tablet to the Universe and a few other things, was himself a thoroughgoing Platonist. But of course, Baha'u'llah tells us that Plato got his ideas from the prophets of God that had come before. So, the Baha'i faith then is this powerful thing. This power exists objectively, but access to this power is conditional. We only have access to this power if we fulfill certain conditions. And so learning how to be a Baha'i, learning how to act morally, learning how to be moral, learning how to spiritualize our lives, making spiritual progress. Call it whatever you want. It's all of these things that really come back to the same thing. Spiritual growth, spiritual development, spiritualization, deepening, spiritual progress, moral development, intellectual development, social development, integration, harmony, unity, love, justice. All of these things are conditional on the fulfillment of certain conditions, or depend on the fulfillment of certain conditions. So it's not say conditioned on conditions. Right? Depend on the fulfillment of certain conditions. It is conditional access. And so spiritual development then means learning how to gain access to this power. That's what it means. It means nothing less than that. It means learning how to gain access to this power. So the process is at first you have to know that the power is there. I mean, so you have to go through the process of finding the manifestation, believing in the manifestation, implementing his laws, and so on, as it says in the first paragraph of the Kitab-i-Aqdas. But we want to understand more deeply about what this process is. Now, what we will find is that not only, it is not just that we Baha'is don't understand the Baha'i faith. It is that mankind in general does not understand religion, because mankind has made religion into something other than it intrinsically is. And so we participate in this misunderstanding in the way we relate to the Baha'i faith. And so therefore we do not succeed in fulfilling these conditions. In order to fulfill these conditions that gives us access to this power, we have to first know what the conditions are. We have to first understand them. I mean, we may have another process once we understanding of fulfilling, striving to fulfill them, but we have to at least understand them in the first place, what these conditions are. Well, so what is religion? What is religion? Well, I imagine that most of us would say that, well, religion is a set of beliefs about God, or a set of moral principles based on beliefs about God, or whatever. This is the conception of religion as an ideology. There is also the conception of religion as a society, as a social entity. Look at it. Hi, how are you? Look at it. Let's think about the discourse of teaching the faith. We Baha'is know that our first duty as Baha'is is to teach the faith, and the first duty of the teacher is to teach his own self. So let's look at our discourse about teaching the faith, because this will reflect what our conception of religion is. Well, in North America, when we talk about teaching the faith, what do we talk about? We talk about methods of teaching. We talk about closing the deal. The faith is viewed essentially as a product which we are selling. The language of teaching the faith is the language of salesmanship. And we concentrate as salesmen do. I mean, the product is already defined. The product is the faith, whatever that is, all right? And we're trying to sell the product. We're trying to close the deal. And so we have contract cards that we, give out to people and so on, and we try to get them to sign the contract and to buy the product, so to speak, and so on. In fact, some of you may very well remember that hand of the call, John Robarts, was professionally an insurance salesman, and he used to very effectively talk about teaching the faith using very deliberately the language of salesmanship. He used to use examples from selling insurance in terms of teaching the faith. Of course, John Robarts did other things like pioneering to Africa under very difficult conditions, and saying the long obligatory prayer, and did a lot of other things which may have had something to do with his success other than the fact that he was a seller of insurance. You can look at all the successful insurance salesmen who are not very good Baha'is, and so one can understand that maybe it wasn't the fact that he sold insurance that made John Robarts a hand of the call. Nonetheless, he used this language of salesmanship as a vehicle to express spiritual ideas, but perhaps some of us have taken the language and not gotten the underlying spiritual idea involved. But, of course, I'm not attributing this only to John Robarts. The language of salesmanship is the language of life, of culture in North America. I mean, the whole of North America is one vast bazaar, right? One vast, what? Either way you want. Either way you want. Both ways again. So, I mean, every day we are told that this is a capitalistic society, a free market, a market economy in which the value of everything depends on selling it, getting somebody to buy it. So this is de facto. I mean, I'm not trying to ascribe to you any beliefs that you don't have. I'm just saying, I'm looking at the behavior, okay? I'm just looking at the behavior. And I'm saying the de facto way we articulate teaching the faith is the language of salesmanship. And this is bound to reflect to some extent the way we look at the faith as an entity, as a social entity which we are contracted to. In Europe, the faith is viewed primarily as an ideology in which you believe. In other words, Europeans are used to ideologies. The great ideologies of the last 500 years have all been developed in Western Europe. Protestantism, Marxism, and so on and so on. Fascism, all the isms. All the great ideologies of the modern world were originated in Western Europe, which had inherited this dialectical philosophical tradition from the Greeks. It also took the form without the substance from this heritage, and therefore when you cut this ideology loose from its spiritual moorings that you find in, say, the works of Aristotle or Plato or Socrates, then what you get is Hegelianism or Nietzsche or any of these destructive philosophies which can, in fact, justify anything, literally anything. So anti-Semitism as an ideology, not as an attitude, but as an ideology, was originated in Europe, and so on and so on. Racism is a European ideology. I'm talking about the ideology, the theory, if you will, that some races are superior to others, was originated very explicitly by several European philosophers in the 18th, 19th century, of which one, unfortunately, was the guy Gobineau, the Comte de Gobineau, who wrote first about the Bahá'í faith in his book Les religions et les philosophies de l'Asie centrale, which E.G. Brown says was his spur to studying the Bahá'í Bahá'í faith. Gobineau was a racist. He propounded this theory of the superiority of the white race and so on. Now, but this was not, you can't transfer this to the modern context. Now, this was not intellectually disreputable at that time. I mean, this was not, people wouldn't have been shocked. Well, sure, yeah, this makes sense. I mean, look, what we have civilization here, and look what's going on in Africa and so on. So it was a very natural idea. Now, what is an ideology? What do I mean by an ideology? Well, maybe I'll even write this on the board. An ideology, not that I write terribly well on the board, an ideology is any philosophy which holds that certain ideas are superior to human beings. Any ideas, I don't care what the ideas are. So that's my definition, if you will, of an ideology. An ideology is the belief that certain ideas are superior to human beings. Now, we can all agree that there are good ideas and bad ideas. There are true ideas and false ideas. There are helpful ideas and hurtful ideas. There are pernicious ideas and dynamic, progressive ideas. But here I'm not talking about the value of the ideas. I'm talking about the meta-belief. I'm talking about beliefs about ideas, not the ideas themselves. Ideas are beliefs about reality. I'm talking about a second-order belief. I'm talking about a belief about beliefs. I'm talking about then the belief or the concept that some set of ideas is superior to human beings. Now, once you accede to such a philosophy, it therefore becomes permissible to sacrifice human beings for the propagation of those ideas. And that is exactly contrary to true religion. Because true religion is not an ideology, as we will see. Religion is not an ideology. If we treat it as an ideology, then we have made it into something that it isn't. The Baha'i faith is not an ideology. Now, let me make it clear, I'm not saying that true religion does not have ideas or ideals. Clearly the Baha'i faith does. I mean, we have the ideal of the oneness of mankind, quality of men and women, and so on. I'm not saying that religion doesn't have ideals, ideas, a philosophy, if you will. But I'm saying that religion does not hold that any of these ideals or ideas is superior to the human being. Well, what is true religion then? Well, Baha'u'llah tells us, it's in the Gleanings. He says that the highest thing in creation is the human being. Baha'u'llah gives a strict order of creation, and in a tablet which is not yet published, but which I have a copy, and I've given a copy to Gordon, and so on, and he may have shared it with others of you, which is fine. Abdu'l-Baha elaborates this much further. There is a hierarchy of values in reality. There's a hierarchy of values. The highest thing in existence is, of course, God, the essence of God. It is the one uncaused thing. And Abdu'l-Baha tells us that the first thing created by God is the primal will, or the Holy Spirit, if you will. And it is this primal will that becomes incarnate in the manifestations. And the manifestations are, of course, human beings. They are special human beings. They are perfect human beings, but they are human beings. And everything proceeds from there. In other words, I have to continue that here, there is a hierarchy, there is a structure. But in the gleanings, Baha'u'llah says, first you recall he says that God created all things. He rescued from the abyss of ultimate extinction all things. Nothing less than his power and might could have possibly accomplished this, and so on. And then he says that everything in creation reflects some attribute of God. Everything in creation, he says, reflects some attribute of God. But he said, the human reality, the reality of the human soul, is that it has the capacity to reflect all of the attributes of God. And then he says, alone among all created things hath man been singled out for so great a favor, so enduring a bounty. You know this passage, okay? Alone among all created things hath man been singled out for so great a bounty. So this is a logical definition of the human reality. In other words, suppose we eventually did actually meet creatures from another planet who physically were completely different from us. But suppose they were obviously intelligent, we could communicate with them and whatever else, and we'd say, well, are these human beings or not? Well, I mean, we have here in the writings of the Baha'i Faith a definition of the human reality which is totally independent of the physical world. He says the reality of the human soul, the human reality, is that unique reality which has the capacity to reflect all of the attributes of God. Nothing else in creation has all of this. So you can see that any idea or any collection of ideas can only reflect some of the attributes of God. So clearly any human being who has the potential of reflecting all the attributes of God is going to be superior to any idea or any collection of ideas. Now, I'm not talking about here the idea of the human in the mind of God. I'm not talking about the human being as he exists potentially as conceived in the essence of God. You see, Abdu'l-Baha explains to us that there is no differentiation on the level of the essence of God. There is no differentiation on the level of the essence of God. So it's like, if you will, that God is like the sun. God is like the sun. And the different attributes of God are like the rays of the sun. And if we follow the rays back to their point of origin, they become one. They become indistinguishable. They meet at the point of origin. So at the point of origin, which is the essence of God, there is no differentiation. Truth, beauty, goodness are identical, are identically the same thing. Or another way you can look at it is that the sun generates a pure white light. Now, the pure white light contains all of the spectrum of colors. So I'm comparing the spectrum of colors to the various differentiated attributes of God. Goodness, justice, love, mercy, so on. Okay? So you cannot tell that all of these differentiated colors are part of the white light that comes from the sun until this light becomes incident on some lower reality. If I shine a white light on itself, what will I get? What will I get? White light. White on white is white. So, if I shine the pure white light of the attributes of God on the attributes of God, this is the love of God for himself that Abdu'l-Baha talks about. Paris talks when he talks about the 4 kinds of love. The love of God for his own essence. So this is the shining of this white light on itself. This is a dynamic process, but which is wholly internal to the essence of God. So there is no differentiation on the level of the light itself. In other words, intrinsically the light is one. There is no differentiation within the light itself. The differentiation only appears when the light becomes incident on a lower reality, such as on a physical prism, in which case the prism reflects the spectrum of attributes. So, we see that every individual created thing absorbs some light and reflects others. Why does this appear to be blue? Well, you all know that. Why does this appear to be blue? Because the pigment, which is a physical substance in this cloth, absorbs all the colors of the spectrum except the blue part. And it reflects the blue back, and therefore you see only the blue when you see this. So the blueness comes from 2 things. It comes from the fact that the light is white, that it contains all the colors of the spectrum, and that this physical substance absorbs all of the spectrum except the blue. Okay? This is the physics of color. So this is like Baha'u'llah saying that every created thing reflects a specific attribute of God. This reflects the blueness, okay? And her shirt reflects the pinkness, and so on and so on. But the human being alone in all created things has the capacity to reflect all of the attributes of God. So the human reality is like what? Well, the image that Baha'u'llah uses again and again, Abdu'l-Baha uses, is the mirror. A mirror is, a perfect mirror is a physical substance which absorbs no light. In other words, if it's a perfect mirror, which of course physically doesn't exist, an absolutely perfect mirror, but we can construct approximations to it, but an ideal mirror reflects all of the light that comes on, right? It doesn't absorb any of it. Or, when you look into a mirror, you see whatever goes into the mirror is reflected in the mirror. So, if white light goes in, white light comes out. There's no differentiation. So that is like the soul of the human being. Not a perfect mirror, of course. The perfect mirror would be the soul of the manifestation, which is the first created thing of God after the primal will. The soul of the manifestation. And Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha tell us that everything else in creation was created through and by the manifestations of God. So the manifestations actually are the instruments of creation for the rest of creation. Now, Now, exactly how this process goes on is something which will obviously take years and years of study. I'm simply quoting from the writings where it is said that it is by and through the manifestations that God creates the lower levels of humanity, of existence, including ordinary human beings. Okay. So the human reality then has this capacity. This is the essential human capacity, this potentiality, because we have these imperfect mirrors, as we know, but we all have the capacity to reflect all of the attributes of God. Or let's put it this way. Sometimes I put it this way. The soul, there are two ways in which human beings are the same and one way in which they're different. The first way in which human beings is the same is that all human souls are created from the same substance. Nobody's soul is made out of better stuff than anybody else's stuff. Now, it is not logically necessary that this be the case. In other words, this is God's intention, right? If God had wanted to create some souls out of a different substance than other souls, he could certainly do this, right? God is all powerful, so I mean, we can't say, well, he did it because there was no other way to do it. I mean, it's just not the case, all right? He chose to do it this way. Well, as a matter of fact, the souls of the manifestations are created out of other substance. This we are told, okay? Because they have capacities which our souls don't have. So he could have done it. It is the essential essence, the essential reality of the manifestation is that he reflects perfectly the attributes of God. This is not our essential reality, it is our potential reality, and therefore our souls are created out of other substance than the manifestations. But it's still pretty good stuff, okay? It's still pretty good stuff. And all the souls, of course, we know the hidden word, know ye why we have created you all from the same substance, that no man shall exalt himself above his neighbor, and so on, okay? So this is the first point of unity. The second point of unity is that every individual human soul has this capacity to reflect all of the attributes of God. Again, it could have been otherwise. In other words, God could very well have created people in such a way that, you know, you are capable of reflecting certain attributes of God, but not others, and I am capable of reflecting other attributes of God, but not certain that you can, and so on. Well, that was quite possible. But that's not the case. Over and over again in the writings we are told that every individual human soul has this capacity. This is its essential reality. This is the definition even of what the human being is to reflect all of the attributes of God. But then there is a third respect, a third way in which human souls are different. And that is in the proportion in which they reflect these attributes of God. This is the individuality, this is the uniqueness. As Abdu'l-Baha says in some answered questions, all men have intelligence and will, but men differ in their intellectual and willing and other capacities and so on. So we can think of the individual soul as a prism. Each prism reflects all of the spectrum of colors, right? From the red to the blue end of the spectrum. But each prism has its individuality. It will give more emphasis to certain part of the spectrum than the other. So you might look at light reflected in one prism and see that the red part of the spectrum is enlarged and the blue is condensed. It will all be there, but in different proportions. And the same way another prism might give emphasis to the blue and not the red. So this is the individuality, which, as Abdu'l-Baha says, is intrinsic, is inherent in our nature. Our spiritual nature. It has nothing to do with heredity, with physical handicaps or mental handicaps or any such thing as that. These are all physical. We know this from the writings. The soul of man, recall, is exalted above and independent of all infirmities of body or mind. Or as Shoghi Effendi said, writing to a mentally ill Baha'i, he said, you should know that these mental illnesses have nothing to do with our spirit or our inner relationship with God. And of course now science is now proving this, that we're discovering the physical basis of mental illness, which is primarily certain stress-produced metabolic imbalances in the chemistry of the nervous endocrine system. Okay? So a mental illness is no more spiritual than Gordon's sprained ankle. Okay? So this is the human reality. Now, Baha'u'llah says then that this reality is exalted above the whole rest of creation. So, in particular, it's quoted in the peace statement of the House of Justice. You all know the statement of Shoghi Effendi where he says that ideas, laws, and principles are to serve the human being and not the human being to be crucified for the preservation of some doctrine or another, right? He says, it's quoted in the peace statement, you know, so I'm sure we've all used this in teaching the faith, where he says, if certain creeds or certain principles are outworn, if they have ceased to serve the interests of mankind, then let them be relegated to the limbo of forgotten doctrines, right? With a wave of the hand. For it is the purpose of such principles, laws, and ideas to serve the human being and not the human being to be crucified for the preservation of an ideology. So sometimes in order to make the point as brutally as I can, in Russia in particular, where the public scene is very grim, I say, take your most cherished ideal, okay, and then go to the metro and find the most degraded looking human being you can find, some drunk sleeping there. I mean, it's always littered full of them. Any metro stop in Moscow or St. Petersburg is full of these people. And I say, you know, find this, you know, person is stinking, lying in his own urine and his own excrement, you know, hardly above the level of a poorly kept animal, and your most cherished ideal is not as valuable as that human being, okay? Now, this concept is not original with the Baha'i faith, and it is not original with me. The 19th century Russian writers knew this very well. This is the whole theme of Dostoevsky's works, of Tolstoy's works. It's the whole theme of Ibsen's works. The writers of the 19th century knew this. They knew that ideology dehumanizes because you can justify anything. I mean, let's take quickly the most blatant example, the Inquisition, in which people, Christians, were killed by fellow Christians in the name of Jesus. Now look, I'm sure you've all read the New Testament. Go back and read the New Testament. Read the Gospel of John. Well, what do you see at every page? Love, love, love. Turn the other cheek, right? Pray for your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. All right? The greatest of man is he who will sacrifice his life for another, and so on and so on. Sacrifice, humility, meekness, love, mercy, compassion. Is there one single word of the New Testament that would give any possible sanction to the act of killing another human being? I mean, absolutely not. how much less to killing a fellow believer. Why are we killing these fellow believers? Why? Tell me. Why were people killed in the Inquisition? What? For the preservation of certain doctrines which were held to be sacrosanct. In other words, people were killed in the name of an ideology. So here's a religion whom everybody agrees, Christians and non-Christians all agree that the essence of Jesus' message was love. I mean, when you think of Islam, you think of submission to the will of God. When you think of Buddha, you think of renunciation. When you think of Moses, you think of the law, and so on. When you think of Jesus, you think of love, right? I mean, this is it. Everybody acknowledges. Love is the meaning, the essence of the Christian revelation. And yet, you see the very believers, followers of Jesus, not only killing, I mean, we can talk about the Crusades and all of this sort of stuff, the interreligious wars. But even then, you could, maybe justify this to some extent by saying, well, these were non-believers. But here you have, with the Inquisition, you have Christians killing fellow Christians in the name of a religion whose meaning is love. Now that's a contradiction. Will you agree that that is a contradiction? That's a pretty big contradiction. So I submit very simply the following thing, that if you can kill in the name of the religion of Jesus Christ, then you can kill in the name of anything. In other words, if there is a social process by which the religion of Jesus Christ could be taken to justify the deliberate killing of another human being, not in the context of war or anything, but just the deliberate killing in the name of ideology of another human being, then you can justify anything, okay? Yeah.
What about the concept of justice?
Well, I'm going to get to that. I'm simply trying to point up, as I said, the most blatant contradiction, okay? Certainly no question of justice is involved in killing people simply because they differed slightly on some obscure doctrine or another. Okay, so that's my only point here. Yes, we're going to talk about the whole relationship between love, power, and justice. But I'm simply trying now to point up the contradiction. Okay, well, so what is religion? I've said what it isn't, that it's not an ideology. What is it? Well, let's say what religion is. I'm going to use my words again, since I'm using my words here, but of course there are many quotes. Religion, let's say true religion, since there are so many of the other kind. True religion is a relationship. So that's the logical definition. Let's expand it. True religion is the establishment. So in other words, this is the one-word answer if you want to say religion is not a product, it is not a social contract, it is not an ideology. Then what is it in one word? It's a relationship, okay? The establishment of a certain kind of relationship, between God and us, and between ourselves. Between ourselves, based on the relationship with God. I'm sorry, but I'm running out of time. with God. Okay? So I'm saying true religion is a relationship. More particularly, it means the establishment of a certain kind of relationship between God and us, and between ourselves, based on the relationship with God. Now, for various reasons, pedagogical reasons, I have chosen to call this relationship authenticity. So, true religion is the establishment of authentic relationships. That's what it is. You have succeeded, you are a religious person if you are capable of maintaining authentic relationships, and you're an irreligious person if you can't. It has nothing to do with what you believe or don't believe. It has nothing to do with your ideology or anything else. Either you can do it or you can't. And the prophets come to tell us how to do it. Okay? What is the first law of the Kitabi Akdas? The first law is prayer. The very first law in the Kitabi Akdas is prayer. Allah goes on and on about prayer. What is he telling us? He's telling us that the most fundamental relationship in our existence is the relationship with God, and that prayer is the prime means of attaining this relationship. The next most important relationship is the marriage relationship, because this is the relationship from which society comes forward. So Baha'u'llah takes a lot of times about the parameters of the marriage relationship. He tells us that marriage has to be based on two fundamental pillars, which is reciprocity and fidelity. And he gives us the premises of these. Now you may say, well, fidelity, chastity, all of this is really tough. That's true, it is. But what Baha'u'llah is saying, look, you want authentic relationships? Here's how you get them. You don't want it? Don't do it. Okay? Okay? You don't want it? Don't do it. It's not going to hurt God. It's not going to hurt me. Think ye that God is in need of your worship? Know that God is independent of all his creatures. Your allegiance cannot help him, nor does your perversity harm him. It's all, he's doing it, the big guy is doing it all for us, okay? All for us. So, to bring this to a kind of a summing up, I maintain that true religion is a relationship. True religion, the purpose of religion is the establishment of authentic relationships between and among human beings. And the basis of this is a certain relationship with God. In other words, in the absence of this relationship with God, you cannot establish authentic relationships between human beings. Now, when we teach the faith and we teach progressive revelation, we say all the religions are from God, but the religions strayed from the path eventually, right? They eventually strayed from the path. And therefore, religion has to be renewed. God sends other prophets because people eventually lost their way. But have we ever thought exactly how it is that previous religions lost their way? Well, the Baha'i writings tell us how they did. They lost their way by transforming themselves into an ideology. As soon as Christianity became an ideology, it ceased to be a religion. Remember what Baha'u'llah says about religion? He says, true religion is the cause of what? Of love, of amity. And he says anything which is not productive of love and unity is not religion, no matter what it calls itself, right? We know, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but you know this passage from Baha'u'llah. We quote this often, right? So here Baha'u'llah gives a pragmatic criterion for religion. Religion is that which causes love and unity. Okay? This is the essence of religion. Now, let's make it even clearer. My brother may have been the first to articulate clearly, at least in the framework of the Bahá'í dialogue, the notion that the physical world is a vast classroom for learning spiritual principles. Well, let's apply a little of this. As we understand the physical world presently, there are four fundamental forces in physical world. Gravity, electromagnetism, the weak nuclear force, and the strong nuclear force. Now, some of these forces, like the weak nuclear force, are repulsive forces. That is, the weak nuclear force has no attractive form. The weak nuclear force pushes things apart. Certain forces, like electromagnetic force, have both a repulsive and an attractive form. This is positively and negatively charged particles. You know that like charged particles repel each other and oppositely charged particles attract each other. So electromagnetism has both a positive and a negative form. Gravity and the strong nuclear force, as far as that goes, are examples of purely attractive forces. In other words, gravity in its essence is an attractive force. Now, what does this tell me? This tells me that if I observe in the physical world two things that are being pushed apart, I may not know why they're being pushed apart, but I already know one thing. It isn't gravity that's pushing them apart, right? Because gravity in its essence is an attractive force. I mean, it is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between the centers of the two objects, and directly proportional to their mass. So gravity is an attractive force in its essence. The nature of gravity is to attract. In the same way, Baha'u'llah says, the essence of religion is that it is an attractive force. Religion only creates love and unity. Therefore, whenever we see the opposite of love and unity, we know one thing for sure. We may not know what it is that's causing this disunity. We may not know. It may take us years of research to find out what in certain instances is causing this antipathy between a husband and a wife, or in a family, the dynamics can be extremely subtle and so on. We may not know, but we already know one thing. It isn't religion that's doing it. Because religion can't do it any more than gravity can push two things apart. Let me just read you this passage, which you all know, which is Abdu'l-Bahá's statement about love. Know thou for certain that love is the secret of God's holy dispensation, the manifestation of the All-Merciful, the fountain of spiritual outpourings. Love is heaven's kindly light, the Holy Spirit's eternal breath that vivifieth the human soul. Love is the cause of God's revelation unto man, the vital bond inherent in accordance with the divine creation and the realities of things. Love is the one means that ensureth true felicity both in this world and the next. Love is the light that guideth in darkness, the living link that uniteth God with man, that assureth the progress of every illumined soul. Love is the most great law that ruleth this mighty and heavenly cycle, the unique power that bindeth together the diverse elements of this material world, the supreme magnetic force that directeth the movements of the spheres in the celestial realms. Love revealeth with unfailing and limitless power the mysteries latent in the universe. Love is the spirit of life unto the adorned body of mankind. the establisher of true civilization in this mortal world, and the shedder of imperishable glory upon every high-aiming race and nation. Well, that's just one of the passages where Allah speaks about love. So true religion is love. God is love, as Jesus already said, okay? God is love. The essence of God is love. Of course, it's also truth, it's also justice, because on the level of God, these are all the same thing. There's no differentiation on the level of the essence of God. So this authentic relationship that we establish with God is based on love. I mean, that's what it is. It's based on love. Now, in the next session, we'll talk about establishing love, how we establish the authentic relationship, but I want to finish up with this, just the basic notions themselves before we get into more practical things, if you will. So true religion is the means of establishing true love, or what I call authentic relationships. And the essence of love is that it is an attractive force. Another way of defining love is the following. Love is the only relationship which is experienced positively by both participants in the relationship under all circumstances. In other words, love is experienced positively by both the lover and the beloved. In other words, we like to love and we like to receive love. Both the giving of love and the receiving of love are a positive experience. In other words, love is unfailingly produces happiness, right? You cannot love and be unhappy at the same time. And you cannot receive genuine love and be unhappy at the same time. So love produces happiness both in the giver of love and the receiver of love. So it is a mutually positive experience, love. It is therefore based on a certain kind of symmetry or reciprocity between lover and beloved. We'll talk more about that later on. And we'll talk about justice when we get to that. That's in the how-tos again. Okay. So, love is an attractive force, and it's a happy thing. It creates unity, and it creates happiness. In fact, I can't think of anything else but love that does create happiness. At least unfailingly happiness, and happiness on everybody's part. So if, for example, I triumph over you, I may feel good about this. This may make me happy, but it's awfully liable to make you unhappy, right? So competition, striving, dominance seeking may produce a temporary happiness on the part of the winner, but even this is a very unstable kind of happiness, because even when you succeed in a competitive environment, you always have the fear that you're going to lose it, and you know just how many people are out there ready to take advantage of any weakness that you show, and so on and so on. So even in the winners, the degree of happiness is quite unstable, and on the part of the losers, it's even more unhappy. So striving, competition, in other words, as we will see, the pursuit of power produces ultimately unhappiness. In other words, when it comes down to it, love is the only thing, and it is the thing which makes us happy. Nothing else but love makes us happy. So when we say that true religion The purpose of true religion is not to promulgate an ideology, but to establish authentic relationships. There's another way of saying that true religion, the purpose of true religion is to make us happy. It's to teach us how to be happy. All right? It's just that simple. It's to teach us how to be happy. If you want to be happy, here's the way to be happy. You don't want to do it? Okay, don't do it. Fine, okay? Don't do it, okay? You say sexual discipline is too hard. Okay, don't do it. Fine, go out. Do whatever you want to do. I'm just telling you, if you want to be happy, here's the way to do it. Okay, you want to have a happy marriage? Here's the way to have a happy marriage. Don't want to do it? Don't do it. Fine. No skin off my back. All right? Okay. So, what I'm saying then is that this is the essence of morality, both individual and collective. The nature of morality is the establishment of these authentic relationships. And the establishment within oneself of the capacity to maintain and establish authentic relationships. This is what spiritual development is. This is what self-development is. It is developing your capacity to initiate and maintain authentic relationships with other human beings. And the proof is very simple. If you are successfully maintaining authentic relationships, then you can do it. And if you aren't, you haven't. You know? So you don't have to worry, go through all sorts of contortions, am I doing it or not? I mean, just look around and just see how the quality of your relationships with people, if you know. It's a very tough test, but that's it. I mean, if you're unhappy and other people are unhappy because of your relationship with them, well, you haven't learned how to do it. All right? That's the proof, is that you're not doing it. I mean, it's just that simple. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that this is easy to do. Nothing, as Abdu'l-Baha says, worthwhile is easy. But this is the condition of access to this power, is knowing how to maintain authentic relationships. This is the prime condition that gives us access to this power that I was talking about earlier. Now, one final thing to relate it more to society. I've talked somewhat more on the individual level in this first session. I mentioned that this was the theme of the 19th century writers, at least in Russia and Europe and in North America. It's the theme of the main American novels, like, say, The Scarlet Letter or Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn. The heart of Huckleberry Finn, for example, is this relationship which Huckleberry Finn establishes with this black slave, this Negro slave who has escaped. And he feels guilty about this because according to the culture, this is an immoral relationship. I mean, you're not supposed to have a relationship or friendship between a black and a white person and so on. And at one point, Huckleberry Finn says, well, okay, I'll go to hell. Anyway, he says, maybe I'll go to hell for helping this black man escape. But in other words, Huckleberry Finn relates authentically to this black man. He relates authentically to his soul, to his spiritual potential as a human being. And he knows, whatever else he knows that this is authentic and that it's certainly not authentic for such a human being to be held in involuntary servitude. And so he draws the conclusion, my moral duty is to help this person. And so at one point there's this soliloquy when Huckleberry Finn talks to himself about, he internalizes this whole dialogue of the society that, this is the wrong thing to do, that slaves are the legal property of their masters, and that to help them is illegal, and so on, and therefore immoral. And he thinks about all the condemnation that his act would bring upon him if it were known by others. And he says maybe he'll even go to hell. But then he says, well, I'll just have to go to hell then, if that's the consequence, because I can't do anything else. So this is a perfect example of a human being establishing authentic relationship independently of the parameters of the society, okay? Well, Dostoevsky was brilliant in portraying this. This is the theme of Dostoevsky's novels. But the conclusion of all of these writers and philosophers who were essentially humanists was the following. The only thing worth having in life is authentic relationships. But man cannot, on his own, establish authentic relationships. He can't do it. Therefore, the human being is condemned to seek that which he cannot have. And this is the human condition. So this is the tragic, dark aspect, the conclusion to which the great existentialist philosophers of the 19th century came to. This is Dostoevsky to a T, this is Kierkegaard, and so on. In other words, nothing else but authenticity is worth having. Everything else is a sham. But there is some point at which every human being will betray. Okay, in other words, this is what Dostoevsky does. Rather than focusing on one character like Huckleberry Finn, he has a whole panoply of characters, right? From the most idealistic to the most cruel and sadistic. And you have all in this pot of all of these characters, they're all interacting. You have Alyosha who visits the prostitute and so on, and he doesn't have sexual relationships with her. He tries to establish a philosophical discourse with her and so on and this, and she says, you know, aren't you attracted to me and so on. So she feels dehumanized or devalued in her value system because she feels that she's not sexually attracted to this man who wants to talk philosophy with her, and so on and so on. So you have all of these, but the point is that ultimately everyone betrays. In other words, if you look at Dostoevsky's novel, ultimately at some point everybody betrays. And therefore, man craves in his essence authentic relationships, but he cannot sustain them because he's imperfect. And this then is the human condition. And this gives rise in the Russian version to this fatalism, which has been noticed and remarked upon so often in the Russian character, that the essential meaning of life is to endure this condition with dignity. In other words, you can't change it. Man is imperfect, and man craves authenticity. These are unchangeable things. You can't change either one of those. Man cannot renounce his thirst for authenticity, nor can he achieve it because he's imperfect, and therefore he can only resign himself to enduring this incredible tension with the greatest possible dignity. So that was one cultural solution to this dilemma. The other cultural solution is the one we chose in North America. And that is the solution that says, okay, you can't have authentic relationships. So what are you going to do? You're going to create the best possible substitute, virtual reality. And so this is what our culture is. It is a vast machine for producing illusions that are substitutes for authentic relationships. That's exactly what our society is. And if you're going to get through the next 4 years as Baha'is, you'd better start right now thinking about the ways in which you are personally influenced by this society, because believe me, you are, whether you think you are or not, or whether you like it or not. Okay? So in other words, what has the United States gendered? Well, it has engendered the movie industry. It has engendered the illusion of unlimited growth in development through this profligate wasting and spending of natural resources. As soon as any new technology comes along, it is pushed to its ultimate, and we have computers, and now we have the World Wide Web and all of this, and we're now people, I mean, already for the last 20 years, the whole young generation has been raised by TV sets. I mean, they don't have parents anymore. They're raised by the TV set, right? I mean, just go into any home and look at the kids there, okay? And now they're being raised by computers. And so people no longer relate to each other. And so their inner lives are totally empty. I mean, they have totally lost the capacity for authentic relationship to such an extent that the only thing that they can do is to give importance to the trivial. In other words, since there is no authenticity anywhere, there's no hint of authenticity, then what you try to do is, since you're living totally immersed in the banal, then you have to somehow give importance to the banal. And how do you do this? Well, just turn on any TV talk show, and you'll see people discoursing infinitely about their totally empty, meaningless lives.